Hello everyone and welcome back to another Artist Breakdown. Today we're going over two legendary producers that go by the names of Lemon D and Dillinja.
You're about to listen to the sounds of the mighty Valve DJs. They go by the names of Dillinja and Lemon D.
Both of these artists are absolute killers that have not only made one of the fattest sound systems known to man, but have also made some absolute dance floor destroyers that will leave your chest and ears rattling for days if not years after. Okay, so there are three things I think we've really got to dial in on if we're going to have any chance of recreating this style. And the first two are fairly obvious in that we need to create really crunchy and fat drums and bass. The third one is actually more of a psychological one, where we need to cast away all our presuppositions about what we think mixing is and the things we can and can't do with our equipment and plugins, and steer our ship firmly into the realm of experimental sound design. In this new land we find ourselves in, noise, distortion and abusing equipment in unconventional ways are the name of the game, and it's a damn fun one to play.
Can I get the fuck out my face furthermore, blood?
Okay, so let's start with the drums. Now, one of the most important things to do to try and get a professional drum sound is to reference a track you really like. And this is obviously really important when I'm trying to emulate Dillinja and Lemon D style here, but I actually do this all the time now. And I've picked this tune by Lemon D called Return to 125th Street. And it's just a very steady kick and snare pattern. But I'll show you this break, which I've basically referenced, and then I'll show you my one to show you how close I got. So you can hear there, it's a heavy kick and snare based track with a pretty straight rhythm, you know, everything's very quantized and there's a few flourishes that I've used, but most of it is just banging away with the kick and the snare. So for this to work, you've got to have a really powerful kick and snare and a really good tone to it. And so for this, I've had to layer a few snares together, and we can get into some of the processing in a minute. But if I just show you the layers, I think I wasn't even thinking too much as I was doing this. I was just building and adding more snare sounds until I got a fat enough sound. It was all about the result here. So if I just show you one by one, and then I have a layer here, which is like a resonant layer. I've obviously pushed out a certain frequency here. I think with this EQ, I've like really slammed out about 800. So I'm trying to push a specific resonance out of this snare. And then this is a bit more of like it's got a bit more life to it, this one, with that sort of shaking noise at the end of it. And then this last one actually happens every other snare, and this is a very subtle thing, but sometimes when you just have the same snare playing over and over again, it gets really repetitive. So layering sometimes on like every other snare, it just adds a bit of variation that you don't really notice, but you once you start using this technique, you'll hear a lot of artists actually do this with their kicks and their snares, is to sort of do every other one a slightly different sound. So if I play it with all the layers and then without, and then I have a few percussion layers, like a hi-hat here, and then a shaker that comes in. And then the last thing that I do, which actually adds a lot of impact, is to add a ride. And then I add a backup break as well. The break here is just backing everything up, following the exact same rhythm as the kick and the snares. So you can hear it's quite a subtle thing, that break. It's not a very obvious layer, but it really adds a lot of energy when the track starts going. It needed that extra break just to keep things rolling. So that's really the programming of the drums here. It's very simple. I'm not doing too many crazy techniques. One other thing I am doing is every now and again doing a big reverb snare. And this what I've done is I basically bounced all of these snare layers as one whole snare, like this. And then I've put a big reverb on it, on a full send of a reverb, so full mix. And then every now and again this comes in as well as like an accent. So the foundation of the drums is actually pretty simple, and I've just got a very steady kick and snare pattern with a few layers kind of backing it up and adding energy as the track progresses. Now, what I've also done to keep this sense of progression going is add lots of little fills and variations. And this is mostly just with the kicks and snares. And you can see some happening here. Sometimes I color them in to show me where they are. And as you can see, I'm doing a couple of snares here. And these things are actually quite important, especially with a rhythm like this. It's really dead on. You need these little bits of skippy drum stuff to exaggerate it. And so if I actually go way later in the track, I think I did a good example maybe in this section here where I've done quite a few variations. Okay, so that will probably bring me on to my next point, but you can see here, just by doing some kick and snare variations, I can bring a lot of life to a very kind of straight groove, and these are almost always coming in the last. This is a 4-bar section here, so in the last bars where I'm looking to do a lot of these variations, and then once again this is another 4 bars and it's coming at the end, and at the end of the whole 16-bar phrase here is where I come and do this break swapping, and this is very characteristic of Lemon D and Dillinja, where they would quite often have straight beats and then spice them up by having these really distorted kind of crazy breaks come in every now and again. It's a really expressive tool. So one quick point I think is really worth mentioning is about developing these drums as the track progresses, and the fills need to change and the little variations are nice to kind of give variations of them every now and again. And an example of this is with these breaks here. I have this kind of smash break sound that comes in. And so that's how it goes in this section, but if I go to the one before, I've just bounced this down, or I'll just change the MIDI by the looks of it here. And given that a slightly different groove, I know this one's also got another different thing happening here, where I've done like a phasing effect I'll show you about later. So every time I'm doing one of these fills, I'm trying to slightly change what's happening, and it doesn't always mean you have to change the notes. Sometimes you can change the processing, or actually just change the drum break entirely is another great trick. But it's all about creating that sense of progression as the track's moving, and so you've got to do this with all your elements. I think it's a really important point to make there. know people are always interested in what's happening on the drum bus, and this is maybe a point where I will have to go and dive through these plugins a little bit more. But one interesting thing I've done is use this thing called Shaperbox, and this is to give me some noise. Now, it might be quite hard to hear, but what's actually happening is I've got it ducking out when the hits are coming through. So I want to keep my hits nice and clean, but then fill up some of the space around the kicks and the snares mainly with just a blanket of noise. And it just makes everything sound a bit rougher, especially because this is right at the start of this plugin chain. Some of this noise gets brought up with the rest of these, with like the compression and the saturation I'm doing. It roughens up and it will actually bring up the level of the noise a little bit and kind of squash it in with the drums, so it sounds a little bit more like one whole unit. Another really fun one is drum bus compression, and this is probably the thing that confuses people the most in music and is the hardest tool, I think, to wrap your head around what's really going on. But the purpose of this compressor here is as a glue more than anything else. What I'm trying to do is make all of these sounds fit like they're coming from one drum kit or from the same space. And regardless of the settings, if we just listen to this quickly, you can hear when the compressor's not on, all the drum hits are poking around a little bit and they're sort of in their own space. And when the compressor comes on, they just lock in a little bit better and sound a bit more cohesive together is the idea. I've also got a little bit of MACD on, doing a bit more saturation, so more fatness is what I'm going for there. And then another important tool is actually just a little bit of reverb on this drum bus with a very small dry wet. I don't want to smother everything in reverb, but the goal here is once again to glue these sounds together, especially when you make a drum kit. Like this I've done out of lots of individual one-shots. You need to find a way to bring them all together and make them sound like they actually belong in the same drum room or the same break. And reverb and compression are both really good tools to do that with, and actually saturation will do this a little bit as well. So I've done a little bit more of my favourite EQ, boosting once again the lows and the highs, and this is making quite a big difference when you put it on the drum bus like this. But then interestingly, I thought I did that a little bit too much, and so I came in with a Filter Freak, was nearly the last plugin on this chain, and I'm rolling off a bit of that high energy just to make it not so crazy. So I've like added frequencies in and then taken them away. I think the thing about this plugin chain is I was being very experimental, and I was just pushing this sound and adding more plugins and continually developing it until I got the result I want. I was trying to really listen to this other break by Lemon D here and just matching my one as close as I could. The final thing to probably talk about on the processing of this drum bus before I bore you anymore is about clipping and limiting, and I'm just trying to get more loudness really out of this. And so rolling off, this is a really good plugin, this standard clip, because you can see exactly what's going on. And just to get things to sound fat, you have to remove some of these transients. Otherwise, your master bus limiter ends up doing too much work. So you want to do some of this stuff at the lower bus level. So I'm doing a couple of dB in this standard clip and then a couple of dB in the limiter. So neither of them are working too hard. I didn't want to get into this realm of like breaking the sounds up with distortion, which weakens them actually and kind of smears the transients. I wanted things to be nice and punchy, but also fat, and that's really the goal. And I think that's what's quite hard to achieve. And it's quite hard for me to explain, is you don't want things to be overly saturated and distorted, even though that's often what you hear when you listen to a track like that. You think they've just been smashed in some plugins. Everything is like incremental steps and trying to just find the sweet spot of every plugin you're driving something into or listening. You don't want to over crank things too much. And so that's really the plugin chain on this mix bus. And I've done a very similar things with my drum breaks, like all these extra layers that I've brought in. With the only probably difference is I'd be hitting them a lot harder in MACT to get a lot more saturation. So if I take this down, it's a lot more chilled, this break. But if I put this back in, so this is an example where you can hear I've overly done it there, and I don't think you'd be able to listen to a whole track with a break this smashed. It's quite jarring actually, in the way that you've done it. It gives you ear fatigue really quickly if you listen to a song with drums or any sound that's been distorted to this level. But it works really effectively for like a drum fill or a drum break swapping, and so you can have a lot more fun in these little sections and go kind of wild with your processing. And see what comes out. Now, one other effect I know I did in this second half, which is pretty cool, is I was doing this phasing effect. Now, what this essentially is you can bounce out a layer like this. So I have an exact replica of what's happening in the MIDI. And then you can see what I've done is slightly delayed it. So you pull it off track. Now, if I don't do any processing to this extra layer, you get this effect. And you can change the phase of it obviously by delaying it different amounts. So you can change the tone of that. But what's actually a more effective way of doing this technique is to add some EQ like this and really shape the phase layer. And also to do some automation on it. So I've automated this EQ to move around like this, just the shape of it, and you get a way cleaner result this way than just smashing two signals, the kind of delayed one with the original one. Just doing a little bit of EQ makes a big difference. So maybe just to finish this part on drums off, I will play this section from the second half of my track where I'm throwing all of the drum elements in there and everything's kind of flowing nicely. And there's a few little other tricks I've got, like the little James Brown at the end of the breaks. And I've also got a crash and a reverse crash in there as well. And that pretty much makes up all of the drum things that are going on.